Alright, since my old account got hacked, I'm going to reintroduce you guys to some of my favorite builds from the past. Welcome to MR Tuesday. So the first thing you want to do with any wide body build is just get the fenders taped to the car. When you mount them with tape, you have a lot of play moving them up and down and side to side. You really want to make sure that wheel opening works with your wheel and tire setup. This also helps tremendously if your car is already at the ride height it's going to be at when you build the fenders. I cannot stress that enough. If you build the fenders before you've lowered the car or before you've put the wheels on the car that you're going to be using, it makes this process so much harder, and I know that from experience. So after taping the fenders onto the car, my next step is just drilling holes. I use self-tappers to get these holes in, and I'll come back later and replace them with something a little bit more substantial. But for now, self-tappers get it where I need it to be, and they allow me to make some minor adjustments here and there to get the fender in the perfect spot before I drill the permanent holes in the car that will really be there forever. Once they're mounted, I can pull the tape off and start really trying to visualize this fender. Now, this fender obviously does not fit my car. It's from a 180SX. It's actually the version 1 Rocket Bunny kit for a 180SX. So I've got to trim it and make it look like it was made for this car. We're getting a lot closer, but it still doesn't really look like it was made for this car. It's missing some very key MR2 lines, but we'll come back to that later. For now, let's move to the fronts. Now, the fronts are the same deal. They're very big compared to the MR2. They're way too long. So the first thing I did before starting anything else was cutting them apart. Then just like the rears, I used some self-tapping screws to screw them into the place that I wanted them. And overall, I think I picked some really good spots for these fenders. Now, obviously there's a lot of work to do, a lot of trimming and a lot of sculpting, but I think this is a good start. All right, so it is time to handle the mounting of the fenders. Now, with this build, I use rib nuts, and if you're gonna look for a removable form of attachment, I definitely recommend these over weld nuts. Rib nuts are the metal ones, weld nuts are the rubber ones. The rib nuts are super permanent, and they're very hard to remove, but that is actually a good thing. You're gonna wanna use a little bit of RTV on these just to seal up the gaps and make sure no water gets trapped in there. You will get rust if water gets trapped underneath the rib nut. So just a little bit of RTV will fix that problem. Another important thing when you're using rib nuts is you want to make sure you use the right size drill bit. If it's a little bit too big or a little bit too small, it will not work. The really dangerous one is too big, because then the rib nut won't grab onto the fender and you are going to have problems for the rest of the life of that rib nut. I normally use M5, but for this build I'm using some M10 button head screws. I order mine off Amazon. That's the cheapest way to get them, and I buy them in bulk. Alright, so it's time to make this thing look like it fits the MR2. There's a couple lines in the MR2 that really make it stand out, and obviously one of those is the massive scoops in the side. So all I did is stick a marker inside the scoop and kind of trace that contour on the fender, leaving myself some room to trim. It's always easier to remove than it is to add, so always give yourself a little bit of space to dial it back with the Dremel. I really love these drum sanding tools for the Dremel. You can take away a lot of material, but you still have a good bit of control. After cleaning that scoop up, honestly, I'm really happy with the shape, and it's starting to look like a fender that was made for the MR2. A couple issues I'm kind of having is trying to figure out how to get the fender to go back to the car, because at the bottom of the fender, we're probably 2 inches off the car, and I'm not really sure how I'm gonna get it to go back. So to match the other side, I grabbed the other rear fender and I just laid the one that's already been cut on top. I used a couple of the holes to bolt them together, and I used my Sharpie to trace the outline of the fender that I'd already cut. This gives me a rough estimate of the shape that I need and is gonna get me pretty close side to side with my design. Now, obviously the hard part about building wide bodies is there are 4 fenders and they all need to be identical. So when you're doing stuff by hand like this, a lot of measuring, a lot of cutting, and a lot of comparing will go a long way, especially at this stage. Again, I'm using tape to get my positioning right, and this time I'm referencing the passenger side often. Now, I like to start with the passenger side because naturally as a driver, you're gonna see the driver's side more. So kind of do the rough side on the passenger side, or the first side, I guess, and then the driver's side, you kind of have a better idea of what you're doing. Now, you'll see me adjusting a lot. I'd made so many adjustments to this fender to get it in the perfect spot for the driver's side of this car. Self-tappers will hold it in place so you can make your cuts, and you can follow that up with riv nuts. Now, something I did do as well is add some paint to the drilled holes. When you drill the holes, you obviously remove the paint, and that little bit of paint is gonna keep rust from getting inside of those riv nuts. Now, one of the differences with this side is obviously there is a fuel door. So I cut a pretty rough opening for that. I'll come back later and really kind of dial that shape in. For now, I just want to make sure my fuel door can open. I'm using the same method to transfer the scoop here, just sticking a marker on the inside of the fender and tracing the outline of the scoop. And again, I go back to this drum sander all the time. This is like a must-have if you're doing fiberglass work like this. You need tons of these drum sanders. You need tons of reinforced cutoff wheels. That will get you very far. And then obviously you need a Dremel. Alright, the rears are mounted and they look really good. It's super close to the other side, which is awesome. I'm just gonna leave the bottom of the fender open for now until I figure out how I wanna reconnect it to the car. The name of the game here is trimming. You've got to have a delicate touch and you've got to take a little bit at a time. If you'll do this now, it'll save you a lot of time later because you won't have to rebuild something that you took too much off of. Okay, and we're gonna leave it at that today. I'm super happy with how these things turned out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. This is the new built channel. This is where I'm gonna be posting all of my content, MR2 build videos, Audi A4 build videos, Datsun 620 build videos, and some secret builds that I've been keeping from you guys that are gonna be coming out very soon. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you like the videos, help us get up in that queue so we can build this channel back into something great. You guys are awesome. You are the best community on the internet. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.